Hello and welcome back to the Starter Glamping Business Podcast. First of all, apologies for anyone watching this on YouTube. For some reason, my camera is not working at all today. Today, we've got an insurance-focused episode. May not be the most exciting part of starting a glamping business. You know, anyone who's dreaming about welcoming guests and providing hospitality may not want to think too much about insurance, but it is one of the most important and often overlooked parts of getting into glamping and also any other kind of hospitality operation, and it's vital that that you bear it in mind and that you follow all the correct procedures. So I can think of no better person to talk about insurance than our guest today, Chris Hipple, who is the managing general partner of Leavitt Recreation and Hospitality Insurance. I've had the pleasure of getting to know Chris over the last few months. We're part of similar sort of groups in glamping, and he is a true expert in the subject matter of insurance, and he can talk to you all day about it. We're going to keep it to kind of 30-45 minutes today, but first of all, Chris, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Nick, for having me on.
And so before we go into insurance, just give us a little bit of background of you, who you are, and your previous roles before you joined Leavitt.
So my name's Chris Hipple. I've been an insurance agent since 1993. Originally, my training was as a journalist, so I've got probably more background in what you're doing here than you think. But started in 93 as an agent and basically specialized in hunting lodges and resorts and that sort of thing back and then. And I was approached in 2009 to come over and be the managing general partner of this particular agency, which specialized in mostly campgrounds and RV parks at that point in time, and took that opportunity and came over. And so I've been doing this here with Leavitt since 2010. And so I've got over 30 years in the industry of insurance and, 15 years of serving the campground type exposures here at Leavitt Group. And so, we've seen glamping come on and become the force that it is today and expecting to see it grow in the future.
Yeah, and could you just give an overview of what Leavitt actually do?
So we do commercial insurance for RV parks, campgrounds, lodges, resorts, anything that's kind of also anything that's kind of weird or difficult to insure is something that we do. So we do axe throwing, we do dude ranches, we do trail rides, we do whitewater rafting, we do haunts and mazes and all kinds of things that are a little bit more challenging to place. And we've got now 15 agents located all across the country. We've got them in Maine, we got them in Florida, we've got them in Wyoming, we've got them in Idaho, we've got them in California and Wyoming or in Washington, and then one up in Alaska as well. So we're all across the United States and all working for the same agency and basically supporting the same industries.
And presumably, you started in what, 2010. A lot of people certainly back then wouldn't have even known what glamping was. It was barely kind of a thing. Presumably you've seen a lot of change in the industry from, originally just the campgrounds and traditional RV parks, but you've seen the emergence of the glamping and particularly a focus on experiential hospitality in recent years.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It originally came out and was just a way for people, with a neat spot to try and monetize it, and then became significantly more professional and sophisticated. And that's where we are today, is that but there's still room in the industry for the person who has a neat spot on the river and wants to monetize it. But yet we're seeing, corporations and real estate investment trusts and, large operators get into the space. And it's a neat space because of that, because it isn't just one flavor fits all. It's very, very diverse.
Yeah, and are there any major differences between insuring glamping operations versus campgrounds and RV parks?
Probably the biggest would be the specialty accommodations. So I've seen different things where someone takes and builds a nest out of driftwood, for example, and things like that give insurance companies, conniptions. But your more traditional type of operation, whether it's yurts or tents or something along those lines, or domes or that kind of thing, isn't really that much different from the standpoint of insurance. your basic package is going to be liability. And so that's the liability for bodily injury or property damage that you as an operator may be responsible for. And these terms are broad in definition. I'm just using kind of the broken down so you kind of understand what it is. And it's damages that you're socially responsible for. So you might not think that you're responsible for somebody walking into a tree or falling in a hole or something like that. But generally speaking, the law puts a little broader definition on that. So you've got liability, then you've got property, and that's the investment that you have in your infrastructure. And generally, your banker is going to want to have that protected. So then you've got any mobile equipment that we might have to deal with, or any autos that we might have to deal with. Generally speaking, in glamping, the property is relatively low because there's not a lot of property involved in some of them. Some of them, it's a significant thing. And then if you got employees, there's workers' compensation. But beyond that, it's pretty similar in what we structure it for. The difference is basically in making sure that the carrier is the right fit. And so we spend much of our day not only selling to clients, but selling the client to an insurance company. So we sell a product that a client doesn't want to buy from a company that doesn't want to sell it.
Yeah, and so you mentioned that you've got liability, property, and workers insurance. Are they generally all done in one package, or do you have to get them individually?
The package can include the liability, the property, the auto, and the equipment coverage. Workers' compensation is almost always sold separately.
Okay, cool. And yeah, before we dive into the specifics of insurance for glamping, could you just explain, in a nutshell, why insurance is so important and why prospective operators absolutely should not overlook it?
I think the reason why it's so important is twofold. One is you can have a significant investment in property. And the first insurance ever invented was basically fire insurance. And so, you don't want to lose that what you put a bunch of money into. And then the second thing is a protection element. And people today seem to be really willing and almost eager to sue. And so having someone there that's got a checkbook to hire attorneys and be able to pay claims is pretty important.
And you must have heard some horror stories, presumably, of operations that haven't been insured.
Yeah, even my clients, because you go in there and you talk to them and you say, well, you need workers' comp. Well, I don't have a worker. I have a contractor and blah, blah, blah. Well, the guy falls off a roof and then we find out, oh, it really isn't a contractor. It's a retired contractor. And the guy was working just on the side for cash. And now you got to pay the $22,000 bill for him hurting his back. And that client was lucky because it was a reasonable number.
Yeah, and then what kind of consequences are we talking there? You said obviously, $22,000. Are there potentially risks for a whole operation to be completely wiped out, or is it a little less serious than that?
No, it is that serious. And the work comp is probably the worst one because really they don't even have to sue you. And what happens is they're building in the state capital called the Department of Labor, and all they need to do is complain to the Labor Department, say they were working for you, and there's state law on this. And generally speaking, it makes you responsible for any medical bills and any disability. And if you disable somebody that's 20 years old, that could be a dollar value that goes up for the rest of their life. So that side, the downside is almost incalculable. Very long, what we call tail on the claim. From a liability standpoint, if somebody gets injured at your property, and I mean, we've had the dumbest things happen. I mean, obviously we've had trees fall and kill people, but somebody helping set up a large screen TV for movie night and it falls on them and partially paralyzes them, you're talking millions of dollars. So, if you don't have millions of dollars in your pocket, you may want to buy some insurance.
Yeah, absolutely. It reminds me a little bit actually of we did an episode with Irene Jones from Marshall Sterling where we discussed the Americans with Disabilities Act and how that's something that again can quite often be overlooked, and yet the potential consequences of not complying with it are potentially disastrous, and a lot of people
Yeah.
aren't even aware of it. And we did
Well, and the
actually.
law's been around since 1992, so saying that you're not financially able to comply with the law is a little bit disingenuous.
Mm.
The one I had yesterday, a gal called in and she's looking for insurance because her website selling salsa was not compliant with ADA, and they got sued because it wasn't compliant. They're paying that claim, on there right now. They're having to deal with it.
Yeah, yeah, and so you alluded earlier to really niche things like axe throwing and ATVs and things like that. How does getting insurance? It say we'll have plenty of operators listening to this or prospective operators listening to this who are thinking of having ATVs on their site or maybe axe throwing or all sorts of niche things. I speak to a lot of people who have all sorts of different wacky ideas. So what's it like trying to get insurance for those kind of things that probably don't pop up every single insurance kind of application?
My general statement, and I try and put things in English rather than talking about insurance terminology, but if it's anything a 13-year-old boy would enjoy doing twice, you really need to talk to an insurance agent first because, there's a lot of fun things to do out there. A lot of things I would even enjoy doing. I just can't get it through an insurance company or the cost is going to be significant. So we've had people build things and put in significant, infrastructure involved into different things that they've done. And we've had people buy things. Zorb balls was a good example of that. It's just like, okay, your insurance is going to be canceled. We're probably going to take it 5 times the price. And the client's like, whoa, wait a minute. I can go cancel that order. And I'm like, you might want to. So it's really, really important to talk about what you're going to do for exposure on the front end with someone because there can be a huge, huge difference in price category that you get put into.
Yeah. What's the wackiest thing you've ever insured?
I had a guy who had a homeowner's policy and he owned a pet bear. Um,
How much did that cost?
More than he wanted to pay. But I got him a quote. I don't know. I think axe throwing is kind of funny, but it's just because it's kind of uncommon still. The you know the climbing walls and the ropes courses and things like that are all doable. If you're gonna go in, if you're going to go in for a penny, you want to be in for a pound. So just doing one thing and it doesn't really generate any revenue doesn't really make any sense to me because now if your primary income source is going to be from hospitality, from staying there, and not from the fun thing that you're adding on, you might want to either charge for it or make it at least carry itself on the insurance side.
Mm.
Another thing you can do from an isolation standpoint is you can isolate that operation. So let's say you've got your hospitality side, and then you've got this fun thing with whitewater rafting or mountain climbing. If you separate it by entity and you keep it separate from your main business, then I insure two entities, and I can generally at least isolate the one so it doesn't increase your overall premium on everything.
Yeah, I think that's a great point to mention. I heard similar from I forget her name. She was on an American Glamping Association meeting. She's a lawyer who specializes in outdoor hospitality, and she said similar. So that the whole business isn't exposed for
Right,
if an
right.
accident happens in whitewater rafting, for
And
example.
it's standalone. So
Yeah.
so it's got to make it or break it on its own. And you can look at the expenses versus the revenues coming in. And I'm a businessman first and foremost. And if it draws to your property and makes your overall revenue go up, it may be worth it, but you really have to look at it as would it stand alone on its own 2 feet?
Yeah, yeah, and presumably location of the business has an impact as well. We've
Oh
obviously
yeah.
worked with clients in, for example, Florida, where there's hurricane risk, for example. Is that very much the case?
Oh, good Lord, yes. The last couple of years have been just a rolling dumpster fire for insurance agents. We're busting our tails. California is basically a no-go zone. You can open up Google at any point in time and Google California insurance, and you can see who's left the state or who's canceled, 100,000 policies. We had 5 million, just us had 5 million in cancellations in California alone. And we had to find new homes for that. So anywhere there's forests, including South Dakota, Colorado, Idaho, Washington, Oregon, California, anywhere there's forests, the brush fire has become a major, major issue for property insurance. And what isn't brush? Like take Texas, for example. There's a high area of brush, but then there's an area of no brush, but there's high convective score, meaning your tornadoes and your hail. And so that's a problem. And then what isn't convective or brush fire is now coastal, and coastal is a whole another problem.
Mm. And it's a pretty common theme from speaking to a lot of operators and experts in different fields. For example, zoning, we always recommend look into the zoning before you go too far down the track of starting a glamping business, before you spend too much money or time on it. And it
Yeah.
sounds very similar for insurance, right? If you're in a particular location, if you've got particular ideas about how you want to do things, the answer always seems to be speak to someone first before you get too far
Yeah.
down the track.
So, for example, if you're in the woods in California right now, we just can't get property insurance. And so what we have to do is go to the California Fair Plan, which is a governmental agency essentially. And it's like I put a quote in on December 6th for an effective date of January 7th. We sent them a demand letter on February 15th, and we didn't see the final policy come out until the end of February. It was effective on the day that they needed, but they just don't get it turned out there. And if you're trying to close a deal on a new operation, your banker's going to be looking at you a little cross-eyed. But the good news in California, they know that it's doing that, and so they're still doing deals because they understand that.
Yeah. And are there any common mistakes? And thinking about insurance too late in the process might well be the answer to this question, but are there any common mistakes you see operators making when it comes to insurance?
Yeah, they buy something or build something or come up with something, and before they ever talk to an insurance agent, so they've got now this fun thing that's added in there, and it just triples their insurance. That's going to be probably number one. The second one is thinking that the people working for you are independent contractors,
Mm.
and they're really not. And so, and the work comp, like I said, of all the risks to take, in order to lose money on a general liability type of a claim, someone has to sue you and then they have to win. Okay. You don't have to do that with work comp. All you have to do is tell the DOL that you got hurt, and they determine that whether or not it was an employee after the fact, and then they enforce it. You're screwed. The government just comes in and shuts you down and takes all your money.
And are there cases when people are just contractors? And I'd be interested in knowing what the difference is between the two.
Well, the insurance doesn't define it. The Department of Labor defines it, and every state has their own definition of that. But in general, if they're under your control, so like I've hired a plumber, right? The plumber shows up when the plumber wants to show up. The plumber works the hours the plumber wants to work. He leaves and comes and goes as he decides to do this. He uses his own tools. I don't tell him other than, hey, I'd like this new faucet. I don't tell him how to do the job or give any sort of input on that. Now you compare that with the average property where you got somebody going around mowing in exchange for lodging or something like that, and you're giving them the equipment, you're telling them what you want them to do, you're telling them how you want to do it, you're telling them when to work oftentimes, you're telling them when to stop oftentimes. So it's really boils down to that element of control. And then do they do this for other people? So do they, like my plumber plumbs for all sorts of people, right? Do they do this for other people, and do they have their own insurance, their own tax license, all the elements that would indicate that truly a contractor. They're not somebody just doing this for you, and then the last element is the possibility for profit or loss.
Mm. And
So, and
and
it's nobody in a park.
yeah,
No.
the answer again is just speak to an expert early, and you
Yeah.
can figure out all those kind of things.
Well, and
Um,
I've been a businessman a long time. You're just playing games at that point. And realistically, what are you really doing if you broke it down and say, what is the real payroll, so to speak?
yeah.
Even if it's just a trade, it's not that much, and the insurance is not that expensive. I don't understand why the industry is so vehement that these people aren't employees.
Mm, mm. And you alluded earlier to the state of the insurance market at the minute in regards to location. Is that the main issue with the market at the minute? Are there anything else going on that prospective operators should be aware of when it comes to getting insurance for these kind of operations?
Well, again, going back to what you're putting in. So, for example, like say I want to do a glamping operation, I'd love to do a tree house, but as long as the tree is not the structural element of it, is going to be the issue with the insurance company. So we have buildings that are built around a tree, but they have their own piers and footings. So you're not relying on the tree for the structural element. Me personally, I wouldn't mind staying in a tree house, but the insurance companies aren't going to look at that sort of thing. So you got to look at the what you're doing and what the potential risks is from an insurance company standpoint. And if you think I'm Mr. Worst Case Scenario, talk to an underwriter sometime.
I'm not sure I'd like to do that, Chris.
Oh, they're really nice people. They just look at this and just like, this is bad. This is bad.
Obviously you're at the forefront of the industry, and you can quite often talk about the state of the industry and how it's really difficult at the minute. How do you see it going moving forwards in the future? Do you see things getting better? Do you see things getting worse? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, okay, so I've been through three what we call hard markets. And so let's evaluate the past first and then look at it today and see what's the difference and how that goes. So the first hard market I went through was immediately after 9/11. And so 50% of my personal book of insurance canceled. And so I'm looking at a huge loss of income, right? And so you got to hustle and you got to get all those policies replaced. Well, why did the market turn hard after 9/11? The insurance companies thought there was going to be an attack or the possibility of an attack every week or every other week or whatever. And so they panicked. They pulled back dramatically. They went back to their core business. They canceled huge, tons of insurance. Like I said, me personally, and this is when I was just an agent working out of Pierre, South Dakota, a small town of 15,000 people, 50% of my book of business canceled, but that lasted about 18 months and the insurance industry went, oh, I guess we're not going to, the sky is not falling after all. And so it went back to basically a soft market and we were able to do that. Now, during that time, I was very fortunate in that I was able to execute and find new markets for everybody. So I actually grew during that time. And hard times I find are the best time to grow. The next hard market was after the Great Recession, so 2008. And what happened was all the insurance companies' investments evaporated, so their reserves were dramatically reduced. And when they don't have the reserves, they don't want to take the risk. I mean, think about it this way: every insurance policy that we sell comes with a blank check for $1 million, and not just one blank check, because there's a reload on it typically. So it's a 2 million, 1 million policy. So there's two blank checks for $1 million in there. Well, if you had a whole bunch of money sitting to the side, you'd be like, okay, but if that money just got cut in half, you're all of a sudden going, oh boy, we need to reduce our risk on the table because possibly they could all come due. So that happened in 2008. And what happened 18 months later is the Great Recession was over and the insurance industry went back to it normal business operations. So what happened in 2021? Well, in 2019, the market needed rate. Okay. The claims were trending upward pretty significantly and they needed to get rate. When 2020 happened, in a lot of states, they weren't even allowed to get rate. In fact, in some states like California, they had to give money back because the assumption was that there wasn't going to be the people using the facilities. Well, what happened? The only thing people could do to have any fun was to go camping. So you took your own facility with you and traveled around where you could control the cleaning and making sure that you were socially distancing and all that. So the usage actually went up. So 2021 rolls around, the claims from 2020 were higher than in 2019. So now we have 2 years of built up rate. And we also had a really bad fire year that year in California. So the insurance companies all buy insurance. It's called reinsurance. And the reinsurance in 2021 went up 70%. And the insurance companies were just saying, we're not writing property in these high brush fire scores. Okay. And so you had that built up rate need, and then the claims continued going up pretty dramatically. And so what happened was they needed 55% just to get even. And the issue there is that the jury pools now have millennials on the juries, and the social justice has worked its way into the courtroom, and they basically feel it's no harm, no foul to award people a bunch of money in a court case if somebody gets injured. And the problem is that everybody else paying their premiums has to pay for that. Okay. So the analogy or the story that I tell on that was a gal was driving down the road. She was not our guest at our property, and she sees a turtle in the road. She pulls over and goes over and picks up the turtle. I've done this myself 4 or 5 times. And she takes the turtle and she sees a pond, and now she enters our property and she's walking down a sidewalk to the thing, and there's a heave in the sidewalk about that big. She's carrying a turtle, so she doesn't see it. She trips and breaks her nose on the turtle's back. Okay. And the turtle crawls off into the pond, and she gets up and she's got a broken nose. Wasn't a guest at our property, wasn't invited, was technically trespassing. Jury awards her 1.5 million. No surgery required, nothing like that. So that the issue with today is it's being driven by claims. So higher prices are gonna stick around until the insurance companies start making money. So either the claims got to trend downwards, which I don't see happening, or the prices reach a balancing point where the claims and the insurance premiums that they're collecting are about at a balance.
So presumably the natural course then is that they're going to get more expensive.
Mhm.
Yeah. And
Until
that,
there's some balance achieved, but
yeah.
that isn't happening right now. And the claims haven't slowed down. I mean, the thing that I talk to people about is when I first started in the industry, I was selling $1,000 deductible. By and large, we still sell $1,000 deductibles. That's 30 years of growth. So they were taking a heck of a lot more risk on the deductible 30 years ago than they are now.
Hmm.
And I always tell people, how many people do you know that just went out and had their roof re-roofed, not because of a claim? They just went out and paid the bill. It's not many. Not many people do that. They kind of limp along until the roof gets hailed out, and then they have the insurance pay for it. Well, if that becomes the general mode of everybody, then pretty soon the insurance becomes a maintenance plan. It's going to be charged accordingly.
Yeah. And well, again, all the more reason to speak to someone early, because it seems like things are only trending one way. If there was one piece of advice that you give to a prospective glamping operator in regard to insurance, what would that be?
Find someone you trust to handle your business, and then explore all the potential negatives that could happen, because insurance doesn't cover everything, and some things you can self-insure in terms of that, but you need to be aware of what you're self-insuring, um, so that you don't make a mistake. Let me give you an example. You talked about ADA, okay?
Mm.
ADA is not covered under a general liability policy because it's not bodily injury or property damage by the definition. But ADA is a failure to meet current law. And so a defense against an ADA claim would be paid by a different policy. And that same policy also covers harassment. It calls violation of civil liberties, and it also covers discrimination.
Again, speak to someone that you trust and speak to them early.
Mhm.
Chris, if there was, uh, presumably, there'll be plenty of people listening to this who need to start thinking about insurance if they haven't already. I would like to think that you've proven yourself as having a deep well of knowledge on the
Thank
subject
you.
matter, and that you'd be able to help people in that position. So how do they get in touch with you if they want to talk insurance?
Well, you can go to lrhi.net, and that's our website. You can click into who the staff is, and it's going to give you all my contact information. You can call us and just ask for me. I do answer the phone. I'm very easy to get a hold of, and I love talking to new potential operators or existing operators. So if they want to talk to me about it's happy to. I can speak their language. I can also speak from the standpoint of owning my own small business, and the various challenges that faces. I was talking with one guy, and he was concerned about this cliff, and it's like, well, you can't take the cliff out of the cliff. And he was just shocked that I didn't tell him he had to put up a fence. I said, you're
Mm.
gonna want to put some lighting up there, so if they're running around at night, they don't inadvertently go off it. But some things are less of a concern than the client thinks it is, and some things are a serious concern.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Chris, thank you. It's been a pleasure. Again, if you want it, we'll put all the links to Leavitt in the description of this episode. So anyone who wants to get in touch, they can. But I'm sure we'll be having you on again at some point. But until then, thank you, Chris.
You bet. Thanks, Nick. And I'm really saddened that you didn't get to see your pretty faces just opposed to mine.
I think it's a big relief for the YouTube audience, I won't lie.